Being able to keep your pelvic floor relaxed during sex is one of the main keys to having incredible levels of ejaculation control, plus harder and longer lasting erections. But unfortunately, it's a challenge for a lot of men to do this. And because you probably have a pattern of tension that you've trained into your pelvic floor and your sexual response, you have to retrain yourself to have a relaxation response in your pelvic floor. So by the end of this video, you're going to understand why you have pelvic floor tension patterns in the first place and how you can take action to start retraining into a relaxed pelvic floor so that you have much better ejaculation control. I'm Jonathan White. I've helped thousands of men from around the world learn to master their sexual energy and create an epic life. Make sure you hit subscribe to stay notified when new videos like this are released. And make sure you get my free ebook that will help you to develop legendary ejaculation control. There's a link in the description of this video. So the pelvic floor is one of the most important areas to focus on when it comes to sexual function in general, but especially when it comes to erections and ejaculation control. And unfortunately, a lot of the mainstream advice you're going to get on improving ejaculation control and erections is going to tell you to do something that will effectively make these issues much worse, which is to do Kegel exercises, to tense up and quote unquote strengthen this area of the body. But this is a great misunderstanding of how the pelvic floor function works. I'll never forget the first time I had sex and kept my pelvic floor completely relaxed. And a bit of background before this moment, which was over 6 years ago, I had trained intensively in sexual kung fu, in Taoist sexual practices, in tantra, and I had a pretty solid practice. I had pretty good ejaculation control, but I was still using these pelvic floor tension techniques. I was doing a lot of Kegels, and it was working for me because in a lot of these traditional trainings, you use the pelvic floor tension in conjunction with drawing your sexual energy up the spine. It was working for me. I had pretty good ejaculation control. But reflecting back on it, at that time, because I was using a lot of pelvic floor squeezing, there was always this underlying urgency. There was a sense of tension. It was like I had to flex things. I had to squeeze to hold off ejaculation. And I never really felt like I could fully relax and just like let go, you know what I mean? And fully enjoy it. And so because I had been experimenting and discovered that pelvic floor relaxation was actually more conducive to having better ejaculation control, I tried it during sex one time and actually got it to work because I had tried before, but I had a difficult time keeping my pelvic floor relaxed for reasons I'm going to get into. So in this session, I'm having sex and I'm focusing on keeping my pelvic floor relaxed. And it was an incredible experience because I was nowhere near ejaculating at any point. I felt 100% in control, but not from having to do anything desperate. I wasn't having to squeeze or like breathe intensely or like, think about an old lady that works at Walmart or something like that. It was complete effortlessness. And my pelvic floor was so relaxed, I was able just to feel the pleasure that was happening fully and just be there 100%. And I was like, damn, this is what sex is supposed to be for us. It's supposed to be all this pleasure that's just sustained and effortless and feels fantastic. And I have a choice over if I'm going to ejaculate or not. And of course, in that session, I did not because I practice sexual kung fu, baby. We retain our semen, at least the vast majority of the time. And so from that moment on, I was like, it's like the Mandalorian. I'm like, this is the way. Pelvic floor relaxation is the way for ejaculation control. And did I mention that my erection was like super, super hard, super fantastic? Yeah, that's what happens, okay? But the challenge was that some of the next times I had sex, I tried to do it, but I couldn't keep my pelvic floor relaxed. It was back to tension and contraction. And so I had to go back to my old methods of forcibly, controlling ejaculation the best I could. So this led me on a journey to discover how can I have that pelvic floor relaxation every time I have sex. And the basic understanding I came to was that I had developed a tension response, an involuntary tension response, because my sexual experience was dominated by the function of my sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response. And so when I was aroused and having sex, there was a lot of tension in my body. And that is what causes the buildup to ejaculation. When your pelvic floor is contracting and tensing, it's basically loading, like a spring, loading up the prostate, loading up the nerves and the tissues around the prostate to prepare for an ejaculation, because that's a tension buildup. And I started to really pay attention to my sexual habits and really reflected on how I had masturbated for most of my life. Because our masturbation as men is how we form a lot of our sexual responses. I was thinking back and remembering that for many years, I would be sitting on a computer looking at porn, and I would be squeezing my pelvic floor muscles. I would be squeezing and tensing up because it created this intensified pleasure response, but a very tense, a very sharp and unsustainable level of pleasure. It basically kept me right on the edge of ejaculating, which felt really good. But that was programming my body to stay at that point, right at the edge of ejaculating throughout sex. And so when I realized that, I was like, of course I had this issue, because I spent probably thousands of hours training my body to do exactly that. Sexual stimulation, okay, stay on the edge and like just get ready to blow it. When you do something for hours and hours and hours and hours, a certain way, often completely unconsciously, maybe this is a time for you to reflect, how has your masturbation habits been? Have you, throughout your life, masturbated and engaged in sex with like full body awareness? You're like, oh, let me breathe properly, let me relax, make sure I'm not straining myself anywhere. Or I'm guessing more likely you were like me, to where you have no idea what's happening in your body. You're just in a frantic state of tension, just like trying to squeeze as much pleasure out as quickly as you can. That's how it is for most men. Again, you spend hours and hours and hours retraining in a certain pattern. You must retrain that pattern. You must retrain in a new pattern. And this is where a lot of men get hung up in the path of sexual mastery, because it's not easy. It's simple. It's quite simple, but it's not easy, because you have to put in the time. You have to put in the effort. You have to overcome your habitual, unconscious, like go-to responses that you have in your mind and body, those tension patterns. And that urge to just like hover on the edge and go for ejaculation, you have to overcome that. And you do this by specific training sessions. So now masturbation becomes a way to train yourself, to retrain yourself. It's a great thing. It's a fantastic thing. Now we can benefit from it instead of maybe doing ourselves harm from it. Okay, so now I'm going to share with you exactly what I did, what I focused on that helped me to retrain out of a tension response into a relaxation response in my pelvic floor during sex. And I should share that when I have sex now, this is no longer an issue for me, at least like 99% of the time. I'm able to just fully enjoy sex, my pelvic floor is relaxed, have complete ejaculation control, and just fully enjoy the experience. Like even when I'm having rough, vigorous sex, even when my wife is orgasming, she's moaning loudly, she's telling me she wants my semen inside of her, these kinds of things, I'm able to hold myself and maintain my composure, keep my pelvic floor relaxed, and not ejaculate. That's how I roll, guys. Okay, so the first thing is you want to establish a baseline of relaxation in your pelvic floor. And what I mean by this is just experience what it actually feels like to have your pelvic floor relaxed. Because most men don't know what this feels like, because they're constantly holding their pelvic floor in a state of tension for many reasons. One being it's simply where a lot of us hold our tension as men. We hold it in the pelvic floor. What I want you to do right now is feel into your body, feel into your pelvic floor region, and just notice, are you gripping in that area? And as you put your mind there, just think of relaxing. And if you are doing this and you just released a great deal of tension, shows you that you are holding a lot of tension there, which is quite normal for men. And what may help you with this even further is to imagine that you're trying to urinate. And the healthy way to urinate is by simply relaxing and letting the stream of urine start to happen. If you have to push to urinate, means there's probably a lot of tension. It's not a healthy pelvic floor pattern if you have to push out your urine. So just something to be aware of. So just think of that. Imagine that you're trying to urinate. Don't actually do it. Go use the restroom first if you actually have to urinate. But just recall what that feels like. And what you'll likely feel is a deep release in your pelvic floor that even goes up into your belly as well. Okay, so that's what it feels like to have a relaxed pelvic floor. And for some of you, you won't even be able to fully release doing that, but at least gives us something to work with. So now you've experienced what it feels like to relax the pelvic floor. So now that you have your baseline, you know what to look for. But the first thing you're going to want to implement into your life as often as you can is pelvic floor stretch and release routines. And I'm going to link you to a guided 12-minute pelvic floor release routine that I've made for you. You can just click on the video, follow along. So these exercises help to deeply stretch and release the muscles and tissues in the pelvic floor and in the surrounding muscle groups, which often are held up with tension, and that tension also spreads to the pelvic floor. So working with those every day is going to help to release this deep ingrained tension patterns over time, and will also be very balancing for your nervous system. So it's really important that you focus on those at least 3 to 4 days a week, but doing them every day is going to give you the best results. So do that to keep establishing and deepening your baseline of pelvic floor relaxation, and that will really help you over time. And now there's the direct sexual practice, where you directly retrain through self-pleasure what it feels like to maintain a relaxed pelvic floor during sexual stimulation. And it's much easier to do this with self-pleasure. If you just try to do this during sex and you already have all these patterns of pelvic floor tension, you're probably going to have a harder time with it. So I encourage you to take some time and practice masturbation in a very conscious way. Now, what you want to do is to not just jackhammer your penis, okay? So I'm about to pull up an anatomically correct penis model, just in case you're at work or something, you may want to, pause the video. So I got a dick in my hand, all right? It's fake, it's synthetic, it's not real. It's a dildo, basically, all right? Pay attention to me. No. Okay, so I'm gonna use this to demonstrate some different patterns that you can incorporate that will help you to experience a relaxed pelvic floor. Because this is, the bottom of the penis, this region right here, the frenulum, if you stimulate this area, like even when you're flaccid, like right now, if it's appropriate situationally, you can just gently rub that frenulum area. And notice what happens in your pelvic floor. If you put another hand on your pelvic floor and feel what happens when you rub this area, I almost guarantee you're going to feel a contraction happen when you stimulate the frenulum. So this is the main ejaculation control trigger. So with that in mind, if we place less emphasis on stimulating this area, it's going to be easier to keep the pelvic floor relaxed. So how most men, they're really centering their grip to put maximum stimulation on the frenulum, because at one point you've discovered that felt really good, and that's just what you do now. It creates a lot of tension buildup. So stimulate yourself in a different way. Because if you go right to just, masturbating the way that you do before and try to keep your pelvic floor relaxed, it probably isn't going to work very well. So what I recommend you do is you start in a very relaxed baseline, laying down on your back or like laying in a recliner will be a great position for this. And just spend a minute or two just totally relaxing your body, taking a deep breath in, relaxing tension on the exhale, and then start slowly stimulating your penis. Having first established your baseline of relaxation in the pelvic floor, pay attention to the pelvic floor and just notice, first just gently touch your penis. Touch the glands, the top area, touch the sides. You can rub down the front. Using coconut oil as a natural lubricant could be very beneficial for this. Start to simply experiment with different types of stimulation. Think of it as more of a massage, because if you just go to jackhammering, it's gonna probably bring you right back to tension. It's counterproductive. So just experiment with different ways of stimulating your penis, and as soon as you tense up, stop and just breathe for a moment, relax. And you can gradually add more and more stimulation over time. Eventually, you will be able to use the more familiar pumping motion and still maintain pelvic floor relaxation. And again, anytime you tense up, stop, take a deep breath, and then continue on. So do your best to maintain pelvic floor relaxation as long as you can throughout the session. And it may be very difficult initially, but even having some moments of pelvic floor relaxation during sexual stimulation will be a whole new paradigm for you. And then with each session, you may find it easier and easier to stay relaxed. And you may find yourself in a state of pelvic floor relaxation the majority of time during self-stimulation. And as you continue to do your daily pelvic floor release practice, the stretching routine, you're going to find it easier and easier over time to maintain that relaxation. And then that's going to carry over into sex. And it's basically the same thing. Be aware as soon as you're tensing up your pelvic floor during sex, and keeping in mind that this region is the ejaculation control trigger. So try to vary your sexual position and the angle of your penis in your partner's body so that less stimulation is placed on that area. And one other thing I'll share with you is that it's going to be much easier to keep your pelvic floor relaxed when you're in basically a position with your hips more open. Like if you're laying with your legs straight, it's going to be more difficult. If you open up your knees, open up the hips, or if you're in like a standing position where you're in a wide-legged, almost like a horse stance, it's going to be easier to maintain pelvic floor relaxation. One concern you may have, because a lot of men ask me this question, is they'll say, Jonathan, I'm doing this type of practice, but I'm not really getting hard. Like, it's hard for me to get aroused because I'm used to watching porn and tensing up and just being overstimulated, essentially. There's definitely an adjustment period when you're used to both visual stimulation, porn, which I do not recommend, and having a lot of pelvic floor tension to drive your arousal. There is an adjustment period. Your nervous system has to adjust and rewire to this relaxation response. But once you make it through that rewiring period, your erections will become better than ever, your arousal control will be better than ever, and you'll be able to experience so much more pleasure without being on the edge of ejaculating. Another thing I'll say here is that it actually doesn't matter whether you become erect or not, because the training is exactly the same. Your flaccid penis is still sensitive, so if you use coconut oil and you're massaging it, it's going to have sensation, and it's still going to have some sensations that cause contraction. So it's still like perfectly valid, even if you can't get hard doing this, to retrain your pelvic floor to stay relaxed. But what you'll likely find is that as you go through a session, stimulating your penis over time, you will very likely start to develop an erection, and this is a more natural, slightly slower building of arousal, because most guys are used to just like going from 0 to 100, pulling up a porn video right into the action and just like being bombarded with false arousal in a certain sense. And that's actually a very unnatural response. Training your body to more organically build arousal, which takes longer, will go a long way in developing your sexual fulfillment and sexual mastery. And I will share that for me, when I started practicing self-pleasure in this way, we call it self-cultivation or solo cultivation in sexual kung fu, because it is a cultivation. You're cultivating your sexual energy, you're cultivating your sexual ability and your connection with either yourself or another human being. This type of self-pleasure practice was incredibly rich compared to just pulling up porn, jerking off, ejaculating and getting done with it. I would often feel very depleted, very disconnected from my body, and often like depressed or even feeling shame and just like, I didn't feel well after that type of experience. Whereas when I was doing this type of practice, where I would be fully tuned into my body, relaxing, breathing, and training my body to sustain a certain level of pleasure without jumping over the threshold into ejaculation, and then not ejaculating at the end, which I also recommend that you do not ejaculate at the end of this practice, I would feel fantastic. I would feel filled up. I would feel fulfilled, and I would feel more creative and just flowy and just juicy for the rest of the day. So your sexuality is truly one of your greatest gifts as a human being. But we've been conditioned to experience it in a very unhealthy and damaging way. So through the path of sexual kung fu, you can reclaim your sexual vitality, you can improve your sexual health, improve your erection quality, vastly improve your sexual pleasure and your ejaculation control, and feel good being a man living in this world. So now what I recommend that you do is watch a video I made which will teach you how to move in a certain way during sex that will be more conducive to keeping your pelvic floor relaxed. So you'll be able to implement what you learned from this video and deepen your understanding by certain dynamics of physical movement to deepen your sexual kung fu training. So I'll put a link to that video, check that out next. And something that is strongly related to this pelvic floor tension pattern is the health or the lack thereof imbalances in your vagus nerve, which is part of your nervous system. So let me know in the comments below if you'd like me to make a video on how the vagus nerve affects your sexual function, and make sure you get my free ebook, which will train you deeply in the art of sexual kung fu to develop legendary ejaculation control. There's a link in the video description of this video. Give this video a like, and best wishes to you on your journey of sexual mastery, my friend. Take care.